So I've created a series of videos in which I offer tips and techniques for buying comics. In one video, I offer some general things to consider if you happen to be buying comics. In another video, I actually put together a list of things to consider if you happen to be a speculator or if you consider yourself a would-be speculator that is attempting to make some short-term money in comics. In this video, what I hope to be able to do is to outline for you some things to consider if you consider yourself a more long-term collector or an investor for the long term. I hope that you find this video helpful. Reggie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. In this video, we are going to spend a little time talking about the long term, specifically the long-term collector or the long-term investor in comics. And by and large, I consider myself to be more of a long-term collector versus a speculator in comics. Even though I've created various videos that look at spec books, that's not necessarily my thing. I do, however, love finding undervalued books either in my collection or in the wild, but I really do consider myself more of a long-term collector. In all of this, I am passing no judgment on anyone, regardless of where you sit and how you collect, right? My philosophy is it doesn't matter what you want to do. It's just if you're doing something that makes you happy, then that is the right thing to do, right? So this is not me passing judgment in any way, shape, or form on how you collect comics. And I am not making, I'm not telling anyone what to do. It's really up to each one of us to decide how we want to enjoy this hobby. So as you listen to this video, I want you to consider a couple of things. As you're listening to the things that I'm taking off, ask yourself, how does my list compare to your list? You may find that there is some alignment in our thinking, and you may find that there are some deviations. In both cases, it is okay, but I certainly welcome your thoughts, regardless of whether you agree or disagree, because this whole thing is all about having a dialogue and having a discussion. So I absolutely look forward to hearing what your thoughts are after you watch this video. So the first tip that I want to offer up, if you consider yourself a long-term collector or investor, is to consider buying Silver and Bronze Age comics. Now, the reason for this is that these comics tend to have their value established over time. With speculative books or modern books, whatever the case may be, you may see some wild swings that will happen in the valuation of that comic. You could have a comic that is one day worth $1 and the next day worth 100 or 200 or 900 in the case of a very recent book. But there are wild swings, and you can make a lot if you time it right, or you can lose a lot if you don't time it right. Now, contrast that to the Silver Age and Bronze Age keys and books in general. These books, again, have their value established over time. And so there is a predictive nature to them where they are either very stable or steadily increasing in value over time, but it's very predictable. And what I like to do is I actually like to contrast the Silver and Bronze Age books in some way to blue chip stocks. If you think about IBM, for example, that is a very stable stock. They have predictable returns, predictable dividends, and somewhat a predictable stock price. Now, contrast that to like a biotech stock or a stock for, a company in another country. You may have some wild fluctuations in value where you can make a lot or lose a lot depending upon the day. The comics that I'm talking about right now, these, a Silver Age and Bronze Age keys in some cases, are just like IBM in many ways. They are very predictable, they are very stable, and it's something that you can count on. One thing that I want to mention about these Bronze and Silver Age books is that oftentimes these books feature some iconic covers, right? If you look in comic magazines or go to comic websites, you will oftentimes see some very popular books over and over. If you watch videos on YouTube, there are many books that you will see over and over again because they are iconic in so many ways. If you look over my shoulder, you can see some iconic books. For example, there is Amazing Spider-Man 50 that is behind me, which is the first appearance of Kingpin, and it features a wonderful, a gorgeous cover featuring Spider-Man and Peter Parker. And you will actually see modern day comics paying homage to that particular book because it is such an iconic cover. So when you think about these books, these blue chip books, yes, they are Silver Age books and Bronze Age books, but within that, there are also some very iconic books that you can add to your collection. The next tip that I want to offer is about buying first appearances of established characters. Established characters are iconic characters. These characters over time have built up a tremendous fan base of people that want to own their first appearances. There are new characters that are created all the time, whether you're talking about Marvel, DC, Image, or whatever. There are characters that are being created that don't really have a fan base because they're unknown. But if you talk about Spider-Man or Captain America or Captain Marvel or Thanos, right? These characters have fan bases. And these fan bases will always want the first appearance of their favorite character. So these are great books to buy into. One thing that you'll probably never hear is someone saying, I wish that I had not bought that first appearance of this classic Silver Age character. That just doesn't happen. No one really regrets ever picking up the first appearance of a great character. And again, for that reason, these are great books to pick up. The next tip that I want to offer is around buying mid-grade and low-grade comics from the Silver and Bronze Age. Why? You could spend a ton of money buying a 9.8 of a Silver Age book, but in doing so, you are also going to tie up a tremendous amount of resources. One way of still owning that book is to look at a mid-grade or a low-grade copy of that book. That way you are actually in the game because you have a copy of it in your collection, but you're also not tying up significant resources that could be dedicated to other books. RB3 is one of my buddies, and he has done some wonderful analyses of why it makes sense to buy mid or low grade books versus the high grade of some important books. So I encourage you to check out his channel because his analyses are top notch. He actually helped me to wrap my mind around one title in particular, specifically Fantastic Four number 48. I was looking to buy this book for some time and had my eye on a high grade key, but realized that that might not be the sweet spot. And what helped me to realize this is that when you look at some of those mid and low grade books, they actually have better returns on investment than do some of those higher grade books. Think about it. A high grade book at a high price only has so many potential buyers, unlike a mid or lower grade book where people can actually afford them. Yes, they're expensive, but people can still afford those books. And so therefore, those books tend to have better returns on investment than those higher grade books. Now, if you have an unlimited budget, I say go for it. More power to you, but I don't, right? I have bills, I have children, and I have to put food on the table. And so therefore, I have to be a little bit smarter about how I choose to spend my money. And so I want to show you one of the books that I picked up is this Fantastic Four number 48. This is a lower grade book, maybe a 3, maybe a 3.5. And over my shoulder, I actually have a slabbed 4.0. By being a little bit smarter about how I acquired this book, I was able to actually get 2 copies for my collection. And I could not be happier with these 2 books. I sought them out, I found them for a decent price, and I was actually able to add them to my collection. And what I will tell you is that Fantastic Four 48, 49, and 50 are a wonderful story arc that I could not be more pleased to have in my collection. So mid-grade, low grade, don't be afraid to buy those books. The next tip that I want to offer you is to buy these blue chip books already slabbed. And the reason for this is that it actually takes a little bit of the risk out of the book. I just showed you a Fantastic Four number 48 that I picked up raw, and I also have a slab version back there. The raw version was a little risky, right? Because you never know what could have happened to that book over the years. That book could have been color touched by someone in the past and then sold and resold to someone else before you acquired it, and no one along the way actually realized that the book had actually been color touched. There could be missing pages, there could be coupons cut out of it, and I can tell you for a fact that people oftentimes will buy and sell a book without ever actually opening that book up. And so you could be taking on and assuming some risk for a book and not realizing that that book has been color touched or has had things removed from it. So buying books slab will actually minimize or reduce some of your risk. So I am speaking about this from experience. I picked up a copy of Amazing Spider-Man number 300, and I picked the book up, I sent it off to CGC to be graded, and I realized when it came back that that book had actually been color touched. And it came back at a 9.2. which is a great grade for this book considering how much I paid. It also has white pages, but it also has a small amount of color touch on the cover. And so that was definitely a disappointment for me because I bought it raw, I assumed that risk, and lo and behold, the book actually had some color touch to it. Now, behind me, there is another copy of Amazing Spider-Man number 300 that I picked up while this book was off at CGC. I, at the time, did not know that that book had been color touched, but I had to pick this one up because I was going to meet Stan Lee. So I bought that book, bought it raw, and I took it to have it signed by Stan Lee, and the facilitator took it and had it signed by 2 other creators on the book, including Todd McFarlane. That book comes back with a decent grade, no color touch, and I am honestly very thankful that the timing worked out that this book was off at CGC, getting graded, and I did not take that particular book with me because I would have been very disappointed if I had received those 3 signatures on a book with color touch. So buying these books slabbed will actually take some of the risk out of it. The next and last tip that I have for you is to have a target list. You want to write out the books that you want to go after, and also some grades, a range of grades in which you want to operate in. The goal for this is to narrow your focus to a set of books that you want to go after, but not narrow it so much that you have a myopic view of the market. Now, the reason I say this is because I can be very focused on a specific goal. And if I have my mindset on a specific book and a specific grade, I may miss out on opportunities for other books or possibly for the same book at a better grade or a lower grade, but at a better price. So you want to have a narrow focus, but don't make it so narrow that you actually miss out on opportunities. So there you have it. Those are my tips for the long-term investor or the long-term collector. I hope that you found this video helpful and also informative. And as I mentioned, if there are some points of difference between my view and your view, let's talk about it. Let's have the discussion because in the end, we will all benefit.